In our headlines on this Tuesday, August 11th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung is stepping up his push to move Korea's center of government south, vowing to open a presidential office in Sejong before his term ends as part of a broader drive to break the country's long-standing Seoul-centric structure. Meanwhile, South Korea's exports during the first 10 days of August amount to $21.3 billion, up over 45% on year, driven by shipments of semiconductors. A powerful earthquake measuring 7.4 on the Richter scale hits western Colombia this past Monday, killing more than 100 people, injuring hundreds of others, and causing extensive damage across the region. President Lee Jae-myung is putting a deadline on his drive to open a presidential office in the city of Sejong. Remarks to this end were shared on this Tuesday as he reaffirmed the importance of promoting balanced regional development. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
Tuesday's cabinet meeting was the fourth under the Lee Jae-myung administration to be held in the city of Sejong. But President Lee wants cabinet meetings there to become the norm rather than the exception.
우리 정부 임기 내에 세종 집무실 시대를 열고 마지막 국무회의도 세종 집무실에서 개최한다는 자세로 총력을 다해야 되겠습니다.
Sejong is often called Korea's administrative capital, with dozens of government ministries and public agencies moving there since 2012. The idea was to promote more balanced growth across the country and ease the heavy concentration in Seoul, which has widened the gap between the capital and the rest of the country in housing, education, and job opportunities. President Lee now wants to take that a step further by establishing a second presidential office in the city.
국토 균형 발전을 상징하는 세종이 명실상부한 국정의 중심축으로 확고하게 자리 잡을 수 있도록 국가 중추 기능의 안정적 이전에 힘을 모아야 되겠습니다.
Work on the presidential office is set to begin in the second half of 2027, with the goal of having the president begin working there by August 2029. A contract was signed last month with the firm behind the winning proposal, and the design is now being fine-tuned.
이게 어떤 대한민국의 정체성과 전통성을 좀 보완해야 되겠다는 의견들이 있는 거고, 그죠? 이건 조감도 정도니까 반영해서 수정해 나가면 된다 그 말이죠?
네, 그렇습니다. 전문가들의 자문을 받아서 보완할 계획입니다.
And within walking distance, a new branch of the National Assembly is also in the works. Groundbreaking is planned for 2029, with completion targeted for 2033. Also on Tuesday, Lee attended the opening ceremony of the National Fire Hospital in Eumseong-gun County, Chungcheongbuk-do Province. It's Korea's first public hospital specializing in medical care for firefighters, including treatment for burns, musculoskeletal rehabilitation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. In his congratulatory remarks, the president pledged that just as firefighters protect people in times of crisis, the government will make sure they too are protected and properly cared for. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports during the first 10 days of August hit over $21 billion, up over 45% on year, driven by shipments of semiconductors. Our business correspondent Park Chun-han has the latest numbers.
Korea's outbound shipments have reached an unprecedented level for early August. According to data released by the Korea Customs Service on Tuesday, exports from August 1st to the 10th stood at $21.3 billion. That is a 45.3% jump compared to the same period last year. It also shatters the previous record of $15.6 billion set in August 2022. The driving force behind this export boom is semiconductors. Chip exports skyrocketed by 155.4% on year, hitting a record $9.95 billion for the August 1st to 10th period. To put that into perspective, semiconductors now make up nearly half of the country's total exports, accounting for 46.8%. Looking at major trade partners, shipments to China surged by 134.8%, while exports to Vietnam saw a double-digit growth of 45.4%. Exports to the U.S., however, experienced a slight dip of 0.2%, China, Vietnam, and the U.S. together accounted for 52.5% of Korea's total exports in August. The country's imports increased by 23.1% to $19.5 billion, fueled in large part by stronger imports of semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Because exports outpaced imports, Korea posted a trade surplus of $1.8 billion for the first 10 days of August. This suggests that the country's trade surplus remains solid and is on track to extend its 18-month streak to 19 consecutive months. 박주단, Arirang News.
And South Korea's semiconductor ambitions are powering up beyond Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix as a growing network of smaller suppliers races to meet surging demand from EVs, renewable energy and AI data centers. Our An Sung-jin files this report from the city of Busan.
Korea is a powerhouse for semiconductors, and when people think of the industry, names like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix usually come to mind. Yet behind the country's global competitiveness is a vast network of smaller equipment, components, and materials companies that strengthen domestic chip supply chains. This company, with around 80 employees, specializes in power semiconductors, but it doesn't make the final product just yet. It produces copper clips for power semiconductors that facilitates the efficient flow of both electricity and heat while improving electrical and thermal performance. Based on the design tailored for each customer, these copper molds are printed, inspected, and packaged for export, which take up 90% of their products. Imagine building a house. The power semiconductor is the house itself. Copper clips act like its steel frame. This company makes the steel frame and the specialized construction machine that joins the steel frame together, bonding copper for better stress operation.
In power semiconductors, the choice of materials is critical as it significantly affects performance and final output. The clip material we manufacture is not only used in electric vehicles, but also in NVIDIA's data centers, where we have recently seen significant increase in orders.
Power semiconductors are different from conventional chips. And as demand grows for electric vehicles, renewable energy, and data centers, so does the need for power semiconductors that can operate more efficiently and manage heat. Busan's Power Semiconductor Specialized Complex is the only complex of its kind in Korea. The city is working to build a local ecosystem around power semiconductors, particularly in materials, components, and equipment, as it looks to further broaden the scope of the initiative by expanding programs like training specialized talent.
The Korean semiconductor market has traditionally been dominated by memory semiconductors. However, we can differentiate ourselves as the power semiconductor remains an essential component. And in the long term, our goal is to establish an integrated public-private foundry cluster that can support companies.
And that's why the country continues to strengthen its policy support for the power semiconductor supply chain with initiatives to further enhance competitiveness. The push comes as the global power semiconductor industry enters another period of strong demand. But Korea's competitiveness will depend on more than its biggest chip makers, as the smaller companies supplying the materials, components, and equipment behind them will play an even bigger part. An Sung-jin, Arirang News, Busan.
In other news now, extreme heat is hitting South Korea's dining tables as soaring temperatures disrupt vegetable and seafood supplies, thus driving up prices. Our Lee Ji-yeon was out at the market for this report.
Unprecedented temperatures over the past few weeks have significantly increased grocery prices. This has raised alarms over heatflation, which combines the words heat and inflation to signal the impact of severe weather on food costs. Extreme heat waves are warming ocean waters and driving up the cost of seafood. According to the weekly seafood market trends for the 5th week of July, the price of wild flatfish rose about 11% compared to this time last year, while cutlass fish surged roughly 42%. Mackerel saw a staggering 47% increase. To stabilize seafood prices, the government is stepping up its response. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries will host a special promotion offering up to 50% discounts on domestic seafood products across major supermarket chains nationwide in August.
By providing about $7 discount per person, we hope to give consumers greater savings during this period.
Beyond seafood, the extreme heat has also caused a sharp increase in price for vegetables. According to retail price data from the Korea Agro Fisheries and Food Trade Corporation, young radish climbed about 86%, while young Napa cabbage surged nearly 87% compared to the previous month. Spinach saw more than a 108% increase. Local merchants selling agricultural products on the ground say they are feeling the impact.
Vegetable prices usually rise in the summer, but when it gets too hot, leafy greens basically just melt away.
Driven by rising agricultural prices, some consumers have turned toward traditional markets, which can be a more affordable option for shoppers. At traditional markets, consumers can save about 40% compared to average retail prices.
Traditional markets are very cheap. Also, they give you generous portions and even throw in some extra produce for free.
Although the extreme heat has settled down since the beginning of this week, summer typhoons remain a concern and climate anxiety persists among the public. To address potential supply disruptions and price volatility, the government plans to closely monitor supply and demand trends for items highly sensitive to extreme heat and heavy rain. While inflation dropped into the 2% range last month, there is still a risk that extreme weather could push up food costs even further. The government pledged to focus all efforts on stabilizing the prices of everyday products. Lee Ju-yeon, Arirang News.
And in our newscast yesterday, we told you about air-conditioned shopping malls emerging as popular shelters against the sweltering summer. Well, today we expand that option to include underground caves and indoor ice rinks. Our Kim Sejong has a look.
Cheongguk Golden Bat Cave in Donghae is the only natural cave in South Korea, located right in the heart of a downtown area. Visitors strap on safety helmets, buzzing with excitement to explore the hidden wonders. Inside, the temperature holds steady at around 16 degrees Celsius all year round. On the hottest days, an average of 1,400 people step inside just to cool off.
It's so hot these days, but in here, I actually need a jacket. Otherwise, I get chilly.
An indoor ice rink offers an even colder escape. Skaters bundle up in puffer jackets, some even wearing gloves, as they glide across the ice.
It's so hot everywhere else, but here it's cool and fun. A great way to beat the heat and humidity.
With heat waves growing longer every year, chasing the cold may soon be less of a novelty and more of a summer necessity. Kim Sejong, Arirang News.
Colombia is reeling in the aftermath of its strongest earthquake since related data collection began back in the early 1920s. As of late Monday, authorities say over 100 lives have been lost. Our Oh Soo-young has the latest.
Colombia has declared a national state of emergency after the deadliest earthquake to hit the country in the 21st century, which killed at least 132 people. The magnitude 7.4 quake struck the west of the country on Monday morning. Its epicenter was near San Jose del Palma in the remote Chocó region. At least 570 people were injured and around 1,600 buildings were damaged, with 86 having collapsed. Pereira and Cali were among the hardest hit cities, where residents joined rescuers searching for people beneath the rubble.
The damage is huge, lots of injured, definitely some deaths. I already know of some. Now we wait that those who can help, not only us, but the most vulnerable, should do it, because it is part of the humanism we all should have.
Hospitals and emergency facilities were damaged. Several airports also suspended operations for structural inspections. Communications were disrupted in the Chocó region, complicating efforts to assess the destruction and reach isolated communities.
I thought, well, let's wait for it to pass. But we saw that the magnitude was too strong. So we searched for a place where we knew was solid ground here in the square. I think that if it had lasted 5 more seconds, there wouldn't be anything left. I think we really reached the limit of resistance.
The earthquake was felt across Colombia and in neighboring Ecuador and Panama. At least 21 aftershocks were recorded by late Monday, with further tremors possible. Rescue teams are searching collapsed buildings as authorities warn the death toll could rise. Sejong, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Iran's demands for war compensation have been met with similar compensation demands from U.S. President Donald Trump. Our Isingjae has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday demanded that Iran pay compensation for people he says were killed in wars, attacks, and protests, adding a new condition that could further complicate efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, they asked for reparations, you might say, or they asked for money for the damage that we've done. I said, that's a good idea. Well, we're going to ask for money for the damage they've done over a 50-year period. Whether you go SS Cole or whether you go all of the people that were so badly hurt, so badly wounded or killed, many thousands of people.
Trump's comments come after Iran's own calls for compensation and an end to U.S. sanctions. The issue emerged after negotiations between Iran and Oman over the weekend. Tehran said it would not agree to reopen the Strait of Hormuz unless Washington meets several conditions, including compensation for war damage and the withdrawal of U.S. troops. In a post on Truth Social on Monday, Trump also responded by saying Iran should instead compensate the families of Americans and others killed in conflicts and attacks linked to Tehran. He also called for payments to the families of what he described as innocent protesters killed by Iran's ruling regime over the past half-century. Trump said the compensation requirement will now be added to future negotiations. At least 18 U.S. service members have been killed in Middle East attacks connected to the U.S. war with Iran since the conflict began more than 5 months ago. Iran presented 6 conditions to the United States on Saturday, declaring that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed until its demands are met. Isingjae, Arirang News.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy continues to sound the alarm over North Korea's growing contributions to the Kremlin's aggression against Kyiv. Our Kim Deun covers his latest remarks, their broader implications, and South Korea's response.
Continuing his recent push to highlight Pyongyang's involvement, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said Monday that Russia has recently received additional ballistic missiles from North Korea. He also warned that North Korea is using active combat in Ukraine to refine its weapon performance and operational tactics.
The more North Korean strikes there are here in Ukraine, in Europe, the more their missiles and soldiers are used, the more they correct their shortcomings and blind spots, the greater the danger will later be for Japan, the Republic of Korea, the Philippines, and other countries in the region.
This follows a Saturday interview posted on X where Zelenskyy explicitly requested air defense systems from Seoul. Zelenskyy's emphasis on Pyongyang's involvement may be a way to push the request urgently. However, South Korean authorities remain wary, declining to verify claims of recent additional deployments.
We are closely monitoring related developments, but we have nothing to confirm at this time.
Despite this, security analysts note that recent expansions in military transfers between Pyongyang and Moscow align with North Korea's domestic weapons production capabilities, suggesting that Zelenskyy's claim isn't baseless.
Looking at the trends over the past 2 to 3 years, it seems they have secured a certain level of capacity for both domestic force enhancement and external exports. For instance, they recently even held a delivery ceremony for 250 launcher vehicles intended for domestic deployment.
Addressing Zelenskyy's call for missile defense, the Foreign Ministry's spokesperson said in a briefing that the provision of defense materials to foreign nations will be conducted in compliance with relevant domestic laws and policies. Air defense systems are considered lethal weapons, with current domestic law prohibiting the provision of lethal weapons to a nation engaged in active war. The spokesperson reiterated that South Korea's assistance will remain focused on non-lethal sectors like energy infrastructure, healthcare, and reconstruction. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Also here at home, a rare Goryeo-era bluestone pagoda found at an abandoned temple site in Cheongju is shedding new light on the region's Buddhist heritage. Our Heungdeoksa explains.
Bumpy, intricate patterns are carved around the bluish stones. These are fragments of a bluestone pagoda discovered during an archaeological excavation at Uncheon Neighborhood Park in Cheongju, Chungcheongbuk-do Province. A bluestone pagoda is a multi-story structure characteristic of the Goryeo Dynasty, featuring fine trimming and stacked bluish stones. The fragments that once formed this pagoda were discovered alongside the foundations of a temple building, remaining in a relatively well-preserved state. This is the first case in Korea where pieces of a bluestone pagoda have been discovered during an excavation of a previously unknown, abandoned temple site. Along with the pagoda fragments, various celadon and bronze artifacts were also unearthed. These finds are expected to serve as valuable resources showcasing the high status of Buddhist culture in the Cheongju area during the Goryeo Dynasty. In particular, they are highly regarded as clues pointing to a potential connection with the Heungdeoksa Temple site, the birthplace of the world's oldest movable metal type print.
By identifying these structural components of the bluestone pagoda, we can confirm that this location was a temple site. The building complex can be interpreted as a significant site related to Heungdeoksa Temple.
The city of Cheongju plans to establish measures to preserve the remains while hosting public events so that citizens can experience the excavation results firsthand. 차윤경, Arirang News.
This is the world now. Off the coast of Oman, oil from a stranded tanker has spread across almost 400 square kilometers of a protected marine reserve. The Omani government said on Monday that the tanker Caroline Bazengi ran into trouble in early June and has been stuck near the Halaniyat Islands ever since. It was carrying close to 1 million barrels of Russian crude bound for Asia. Security sources say there were signs that an explosion had damaged the ship. The oil slick now sits within about 7 kilometers of the coast. The Caroline Bazengi is part of Russia's shadow fleet of aging tankers and is under European sanctions. In Europe, this summer's heat and drought could wipe out most of the growth the European Union expected this year, according to a report published Saturday by the Dutch bank Triodos. The bank puts the damage at about 1% of the bloc's output, which is worth roughly $208 billion. Most of the figure is due to workers getting less done in the heat. France looks like being the worst hit, as repeated heat waves could push its economy into a contraction this year. The European Commission had forecast EU growth of 1.1%. In the United States, jury selection has begun in the murder trial over the killing of rap legend Tupac Shakur 30 years after he was shot in Las Vegas. Prosecutors say 63-year-old Dwayne Davis organized the drive-by shooting. He has pleaded not guilty. Under Nevada law, he can be convicted even if he did not fire the gun. Tupac was 25 years old at the height of his rap career and known for his inspirational lyrics. The case went cold for nearly 3 decades until Davis began talking publicly about being involved in the crime. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
The heat has eased quite a bit, but summer doesn't seem ready to give up just yet. Heat advisories are still in place mainly across the western parts of the country, including Seoul. And tropical night advisories are only in place for parts of the Jeollado provinces and Jeju Island. Meanwhile, we'll have to keep an eye on Typhoon Chantu, the 15th typhoon of the season. It'll weaken after making landfall near Tokyo, Japan. But some of its leftover rain clouds will move toward the East Sea, bringing rain to the East Coast starting tomorrow. Because of those lingering rain clouds, parts of the East Coast in Gangwon-do province and northern Gyeongsang-buk-do province could see 20 to 60 millimeters of rain tomorrow and Thursday. Gyeongsang-namdo province could also get 10 to 40 millimeters on Thursday. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 23 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon 18 and Gwangju 21 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 33 degrees, Daegu 31 and Jeju 30 degrees. For now, we'll see more typical summer heat, with the extreme temperatures easing off. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at the Sa here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session.
오늘은 대한민국 임시정부를 이끌었던 김구 선생님의 백범일지를 살펴볼 거예요. 그분이 평생을 바쳐지키려
한없이 가지고 싶은 것은 높은 문화의 힘입니다. 문화의 힘은 우리 자신을 행복하게 하고 나아가서 남에게 행복을 주기 때문입니다. 나는 우리나라가 세계에서 가장 아름다운 나라가 되기를 원합니다.
저는 이제 손글씨 쓰는 거를 되게 좋아했었는데요. 처음에는 이제 취미로 시작을 했고 이제 하다 보니까 글씨를 쓰는 행위 자체가 정서적으로 돌봄을 시켜주더라고요. 제가 많이 힘든 시기에 글씨를 쓰기 시작했었거든요. 돌이켜보면 힘든 시기를 글씨로 극복했었던 것 같아요. 이제 글이 갖는 힘이 있어요. 네, 그래서 이제 저도 글씨를 처음에 형적으로만 이렇게 표현을 하고 그림 그리듯이 썼었거든요. 근데 쓰다 보니까 점점 글을 쓰게 되더라고요. 이제 글이 글씨가 되고 글씨가 글이 되고 이 메시지적인 부분이 크다 보니까 그런 어떤 직관적인 힘을 갖고 있는 것 같아요. 이렇게 글씨를 쓰는 행위 자체가 되게 아름답다고 느꼈거든요. 그래서 이걸 쓰는 순간을 한번 예술로 만들어 보면 좋겠다 해서 제가 글씨를 원래는 이렇게 책상 위에서 썼다면 어떤 벽면에 세우듯이 마치 춤을 추듯이 그렇게 이제 글씨를 퍼포먼스 공연으로 한번 해볼까 해서 이렇게 시작하게 된 것 같아요. 외국인 분들도 이걸 뜻을 알지 못해도 되게 아름답다고 느끼시고 예쁘게 봐주시는 것 같더라고요. 여러 기억이 있지만 또 카타르에서의 경험이 되게 기억이 나요. 어떤 분이 이제 보시면서 우시더라고요. 그런 장면들이 어쩌면 저를 계속 이렇게 하게 하는 그런 원동력이 되는 것 같기도 해요. 해외에 나가면 오히려 더 애국심이 생기더라고요. 그래서 세계 시장으로 나가고 싶어요. 공연이 될 수도 있고 교육이 될 수도 있을 것 같아요. 이런 한글을 쓰는 행위 자체가 지금은 사실 손글씨도 잘 안 쓰는 시대지만 오히려 이런 시대일수록 되게 더 가치 있는 일이 될 것 같다고 이제 제가 믿거든요. 그리고 제가 그런 역할을 할 수 있으면 되게 좋을 것 같아요.
The Korean wave is drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% success rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the Trump administration's latest tariffs to South Korea's property taxes to stock market jitters. Do stay with us.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Tuesday, August 11th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. From U.S. tariffs to South Korea's property tax reform to local stock market concerns, we take a closer look at the key economic developments shaping the country and what they mean for businesses, investors and households. For more on this, I have independent journalist Kelly Kasulis-Jo here in the studio. Kelly, it's great to have you here.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
I also have Professor Yoo Jung-min at Heungdeoksa University joining the session virtually. Professor Yoo, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Lovely. We start here in the studio. Kelly, let's begin with details of the Trump administration's 15% tariff and a series of price floors on products made from polysilicon.
Right. So to start, I mean, polysilicon, for those who don't know, it's a key component that's used in solar panels and semiconductors. In terms of the global demand for it, it's quite high, and it's currently 90% supplied by China. The U.S. actually used to be the largest supplier of polysilicon, but that has changed in recent times. So setting that up, knowing that it's something that we need for, key technology as well as defense technology, and it's mostly coming from China, the Trump administration announced on Thursday basically a signed declaration saying that they intend to, one, set a minimum price for polysilicon. The idea there is to allow U.S. manufacturers or other manufacturers to make a little bit of profit on this material, whereas maybe before they couldn't compete with the Chinese market. So essentially having a minimum price, which will probably be higher than it is right now, as well as putting a 15% tariff on any product that has polysilicon in it or is made with it. That said, there was a little bit of a caveat in the announcement saying that if you have an explicit trade agreement with the United States, there might be an exception granted to you, so you may not be hit with that 15% tariff. But basically, the argument is that the Trump administration wants to boost national production of this product. As far as the United States is concerned, it's never a good thing when they need something very badly and the majority of it is supplied by China or maybe a power that it is a little bit adversarial with. We've seen similar issues with the critical minerals that come out of China. And the other argument for this is that this declaration was made out of a national security concern. So the chips that are made in part with this polysilicon are really important for defense systems, radar control systems, things that at least the Trump administration says is really critical for the U.S. military, and therefore that justifies this kind of executive action.
Professor, you do tell us a bit more about the purpose of these latest U.S. tariffs, and how do they look to affect South Korean businesses?
So let's say the most of the tariff has an aim to boost up this domestic production, of course, but especially for this case, let's say for example, in the U.S. market, let's say there are several importers who is selling similar products. But what if they have a similar, exactly same tax rate, for example, in this case, 15%? Then, if they're competing each other in the U.S. market, but if they have exactly same level of tax rate, tariff rate, then among the importers, there are not much difference in their prices after the tax. So, of course, there should be some price advantage for the U.S. Domestic producer, but not much for the importers. So if I'm asked about what would be the effect for the Korean exporter, I mean who's producing in Korea, then I can say there are not much of big impact for them. But at the end of that kind of market, at the end, consumers in the United States may have a burden for increased price by the added after the tax. So right now, what is the purpose of this kind of tax policy? Of course, there should be protect the domestic producer of the U.S. But I think that right now President Trump's administration right now is aiming to maintain its cash flow from the tax policy, and then actually that kind of tax policy turns out to be unlawful by the Supreme Court and the U.S. Court of the International Trade. But right now they are trying to introduce the new kinds of tariff policy, and that's right now this current 15% of the tax rate. But I don't think that kind of tax policy doesn't have a big impact compared to the inflation rate. Inflation rate actually slowed down the economy, and also from the perspectives of economists, I think that the tax effect cannot be bigger than the cash rate effect. So that's kind of an undeniable fact for me.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, here in South Korea, Kelly, the Lee Jae-myung administration has unveiled its property tax reform. Could you walk us through the changes and the public response?
Well, simply put, if I'm going to keep this very succinct, and for the average viewer, President Lee's administration has launched higher taxes, a plan for higher taxes for high-value investment properties. The reason why this matters is President Lee, I mean, I think when he first was elected, a lot of people wondered, this another Minju Party leader, maybe there will be a double-down focus on North Korea, and that will be kind of the national news headline that's always coming out of the Blue House. But actually, the Western media has been paying a lot of attention to his property reform and his tax reforms, and really his campaign against the high cost of living in Seoul. So for those that don't live here, I wrote a piece for this about this for the Christian Science Monitor, but in Seoul, property taxes have gone up about 19% last year, and they've gone up quite a bit over the last 5 or 6 years. In fact, in some parts of Seoul, it's more than doubled. And nationally, even outside of Seoul, we're talking about a 9% increase. So that's certainly not on pace with wages, and it's becoming harder and harder to own, which is a really important thing for most Korean families. Korea has some of the highest home ownership rates in the OECD, much more than Europe and the United States. Having a deed to the place that you live is very culturally significant here. And President Lee has really blamed a lot of these ails or these problems on property speculation. And he has really tied this problem very closely to the birth rate issue and other major social ails in South Korea. So he essentially argues that the fact that people can't afford a place to live that they can own rather than rent as one of the main reasons for why people are not getting married and therefore not having children. And culturally speaking, there's a high correlation there. People do feel that they need to at least buy property in order to have kids. Maybe they get married and they buy property together by pooling finances. I believe there's just a piece in the New York Times about how more people are trying to get married just to simply pool two incomes together than in years prior, and the income matters more. So when we're talking about property speculation, we're talking about people who buy up multiple homes, seeing them as investments and a way to get rich over time. I think, most people who are buying in Seoul do kind of view real estate in this way. Like culturally, in other parts of the world, people might see buying a house as simply buying a place to live. The amount that they're paying is worth it if they can have a stable place to live, whereas Korean people kind of see it as their stock market, their way to build long-term wealth and get ahead financially. So you have a system where for many years, according to the Lee administration at least, and some economists that I spoke with, housing economists, that you have a situation where people were taking out mortgages and loans for houses that they can't really afford. We're talking about the aspirational apartment in Gangnam. Like maybe they could have afforded a villa in a very desirable Seoul district, but if they're thinking, if I want to make that much of an investment, I also want it to be my retirement plan, my way to get rich, my way to build wealth. And so a lot of these, viable units have been swallowed up by people that either already have the means to buy multiple apartments or are willing to take out really egregious loans in order to hopefully make a buck in the end. And so there's been a crackdown broadly, without getting into all of the details of the policies, because I'm also not an economist, but kind of explaining the greater themes here. The Lee administration has been trying to encourage people to invest more in the stock market rather than seeing buying property as their only way to build wealth. It's been trying to incentivize people taking out mortgages for homes that they can actually afford in Seoul rather than these really expensive apartment complexes that most people, including people that work at major conglomerates, cannot afford. And really working on cracking down on lenders so that people who are not taking out mortgages basically or loans for homes that they can't afford. And the idea is that I think the idea is in part to change a little bit of the cultural attitude towards home ownership. Like, this is something I'm buying to raise my kids in and have some stability. It's not necessarily a way of getting rich. That's the idea. But also to avoid the situation where people are, borrowing tons of money from family members, from banks, from private institutions to buy an apartment in Gangnam and then immediately try to rent it out, as Jun say, to pay back some of that initial capital that they were taking. So it's a really complicated system, but all of it is to say that they're trying to incentivize people to buy homes that are actually within their salary range and are reasonable, and to try to stop people from eating up the housing stock, which is very limited, and trying to get rich in the process.
Right. Professor Yu, I wonder, could you explore the merits and setbacks of this latest reform in South Korea's property tax for us?
Yeah, I mostly agree with what Kelly has mentioned about the high prices of the Korean real estate market, especially for the housing, the apartments, and then. So your question is about so what is the good things and bad things for the latest form of the property tax? So I think it should be done someday. Of course, if this regime can perform this kind of a property tax reform, yeah, that would be excellent. But I'm not really satisfied with what he have announced some days ago. But it should be, I think it should be more strengthened over the time. Right now, many people, because the housing price is too high, especially for the Gangnam area and Seoul area, many people even say like how high housing prices working like a contraceptive measure for the young generation. So it's really important for the future generation. So if what is the good things for the for this property tax policy? Yes, it's very good for the future generation because it pushes down. It has some economic. It could be economic measures to push the prices down, and especially for the property tax, it could be a very big burden for the owners. For most of the developed countries, the property tax rate is almost like 1% of its value. So 1% of its cash outflow from their revenue is actually very big. It's very big. So also, the current government of Korea has also recognized that 1% is too high for them right now. It's almost 1/3 of the 1%. I mean, just 0.3% or something like that. So it could be a very big burden. So they're gonna probably trying to sell their house in the market, so it can push the price down. But the bad things for the what would be the bad effect for that? It will be a burden for the homeowners, of course. Homeowners, they should sell their property if they really want to avoid that kind of cash outflow. So right now, government also is considering about what if they lose vote because of this high rate of property tax. So, but someday they should be done in the market in terms of the sound real estate market. So so far, government have performed lots of policies, including bank mortgage control and city renovation, and also capital gain tax and acquisition tax rate, or tax for the rent revenue. But the tax for the rent revenue is only for the consumer, commercial real estate, and also the tax for the capital gain and tax for the acquisition. It's just to freeze the market. So I believe that property tax is the only measure that we can do. We can actually press down the real estate prices. So I hope that the policymaker really recognize this issue. But I'm pretty sure they already know that. But they are just to avoid to have this policy real, because they just do not want to lose their vote in the election.
Right. For now, the reform itself has also prompted quite a bit of social commentary. Kelly, earlier on, you mentioned the local stock market. There's been quite a bit of foreign media coverage about the market and the concerns raised by retail investors in the South Korean stock market. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, so the reason why I think there's so much concern right now, speaking to the earlier two questions about the housing market, there's a lot of middle-income Korean people, especially young people, who really don't have any hopes of buying a home anytime soon because of the skyrocketing prices. And so back in May and June, when Kospi was, growing in value exponentially, some of these people were putting really honestly their entire life savings or significant portions of it in the Kospi. I have personally spoken with people that have done this. I have friends that have done this. And now we're seeing this series of small, precipitous drops that recover a little bit, but that cause a lot of shock and concern in the market, and it's certainly getting the foreign media's attention. So just this month, I believe Kospi is down about 22%. And when we talk about retail investors, we're talking about individuals like myself who are not professionals, who are buying and selling things like stocks and bonds with the hopes of at least beating inflation, but really growing some kind of wealth, because the traditional ways of doing that, such as in buying properties and them going up in value over our lifetime, is no longer available for the average person. So in May and June, when this was really a hot topic and people were extremely optimistic about Kospi, I read that $54.2 billion worth of retail investor average person trades were happening. So we're talking about an exceptional amount of capital. And now that you know, things are going down and there's causing some kind of like market panic here or there, like those kind of short headlines are always in the news. It's creating the sense that people are becoming even more worried about the future. There's some real financial loss if they're selling. And, you know, when this was happening, when there was this optimism, this was brought up by many economists and pundits, including on Arirang, I'm sure, because we're talking about an index that really 50% of which is made up of two companies, Samsung and SK Hynix. And I think this is yet another story of how the AI boom is getting a lot of people excited about growing wealth. Like we think about the .com boom, that was kind of a similar thing. A lot of people in my generation joke about, like, I hate that I was 8 years old in the .com boom and I couldn't make investments, but that bubble burst as well, right? So there's a lot of attention being paid to it because Korea is a major economic player on the global stage. The won right now, although it appears to be recovering against the dollar, you know, there's been a lot of volatility there. And now there's all these young people that put 30, 40, 50, 100 million won, which can't buy them a house, in this index, into Kospi, and they're losing some of it potentially.
Right. Professor Yu, an opinion piece carried by Bloomberg also raised concerns about investment in South Korea. Could you touch upon the concerns raised and your response?
Yeah, I've read that the article, and then the article was mostly about the Korea National Pension Fund. Deliberately, they kind of delay their decision to re-rating of the stock investment. And also, one of the other issues was that Korean people especially, they're really interested in a very speculative investment, really. But the government has allowed them to invest the leveraged ETF for the individual stocks. So that's the two things that that article, the Bloomberg article, has mentioned about, and then blaming. But so their title was like a Korea stock market is not investable anymore. But yeah, that article has had a very key point and very understandable. And then too much volatile market makes the Korean market not investable. So I partly agree on that. So, but something that I don't really agree is that you know what, the Korea National Pension Fund, they also have their incentive to maximize their profit. You know, of course, they have a public role to stabilize the Korea stock market, but because they have the other jobs to maximize their own wealth, so they kind of try to concentrate their investment for the stocks that's growing growing faster compared to the other stocks. So I kind of understandable that these pension guys can deliberately weigh more for the Samsung Electronics or SK Hynix. So that's something that I can understandable. And the other thing is that Koreans are, I mentioned that Koreans are really love the very speculative investment, such as like leverage the ETF or the futures and options. So even the old lady who's living in the neighborhood also suggested me to invest Kospi. She said oh, you're an economic professor, and why don't you invest your money in Kospi? And then I realized that people are now getting being insensitive to the risk of the market, and then that actually really market becomes more volatile and very risky. So for decades, actually, there was a huge Korean discount. But recently, we have a high overvaluation. So I think that all the responsibility that we should bear is on the investors. So we need to think very carefully about whether the market is overvalued or undervalued.
Right, it's always better to be safe than sorry then. Professor Yoo Jung-min at Heungdeoksa University, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Kelly here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you as well.
Right, that brings us to the end of this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.